Jay, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me this morning. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I think that we were able to dive into quite a few things when we last chatted and could have easily recorded then, but I'm glad we're here now. And I think habits is something people struggle with in my therapeutic work. I see two things that people struggle with. One is getting started, and then the second piece is the consistency. And I am curious to hear your version of it or your perspective on habits and what works because you've done really well for yourself. And I don't want to reveal your age, but to be able to continue to work out as much as you do, I think there's something to be said about that. So I'm sure we'll get into all of that. But before we do, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what's brought you here today.
Thanks for having me, Furkan. I am 70 years old, by the way. And I did go to the gym this morning, and it's amazing how much more forgivable the gym is
Yeah.
after you turn 70. Like, you could screw up all you want. You could lift the lighter weights. Nobody cares. Nobody notices. But I've come a long way, if only in years. Spent 25 or so years as a magazine editor and manager and a journalist in Washington, D.C., and then ended up as a manager, something I found I didn't enjoy very much, but I ended up with supervising a staff of some 300 people. And along the way, I discovered rhetoric, the art of persuasion, and fell completely in love with it. And so my wife actually encouraged me to quit my last legitimate job. She's
Mm.
very smart. I do everything she says. Of course, our income just crashed.
Yeah.
She hadn't earned a paycheck in more than 20 years. She went back to work, and I wrote my first book on rhetoric. Thank you for arguing. Uh, and it was a passion project on my part. People thought was having a rather late midlife crisis.
Mm.
And yet it did great things for me, at least in the sense that it helped spread the gospel of rhetoric, which teaches people to disagree without being violent. Rhetoric is one of the original um, sources of democracy because it allows people a means of argument that isn't
Mhm.
doesn't have to be formal. It can be political. It can be just about any kind of conversation. But what it has to do with is choices that affect the future. And the more we know that, I think the better a future we'll have.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, and lots of questions coming up. But I guess around the working out piece, before we jump into the questions I have on rhetoric, like how has your how have you adapted in terms of you go to the gym still, but over the years to make sure you're sustaining yourself and still being able to go to the gym and not feeling sore? Like what modifications have you made in terms of being able to do that?
In terms of just sheer working out, you can do, I'm convinced of this, as long as you don't have serious health problems. And I did for a while and had to overcome them. The rules change. And you can still do stuff, but you can't spend all night drinking anymore. There, you have to work a little bit harder just to sustain the level of fitness.
Mm.
So now how do you do that? And that's really where you had mentioned habits before. Can we talk about that?
Of course.
So Aristotle, who is my man, he is the source, wrote the original book on rhetoric, but he's also the original and probably best philosopher of habit. And so the way he defines it, I think, is just absolutely perfect. First of all, habit is choicelessness. It's delightful choicelessness. I mean, one of the biggest problems we have, sources of stress, is that we have so many choices,
Yes.
moment by moment, more than ever. Um, by developing a habit, you put yourself on autopilot. You don't really have to decide what you want to do. So I get up a little after 4 in the morning in my own time zone. I call it
Mhm.
daylight saving.
Okay.
Um, and I head to the gym. I walk a mile to the gym, and I'm there at 5 a.m. when it opens. If I decided whether I wanted to do that, I definitely would not go. I
Right.
live in New Hampshire. It was cold this morning. I
Yeah.
was wearing just workout shorts and a light jacket, and I'm walking in the dark. And that's the easy part. Then I hit the gym and I'm with these lithe young things, men and women. And I didn't decide to do that. I simply did. So the way I ended up doing that actually developed fairly late in life for me when
Mm.
I was in my late 50s, actually. I was getting out of shape. I was gaining weight a little bit.
Mhm.
And I was suffering from this debilitating hip problem called snapping hip syndrome. I don't want to
Mhm.
get into too much detail, so it's really disgusting. But essentially, it means the tendon that goes from your knee to your hip, the iliotibial tendon, was catching on my hip on both
Mm.
sides. And when it does that, you literally crash to the ground. You're completely crippled. And years go by. I'm trying everything, one doctor after another. And finally, my regular doctor said, I know a guy who I think would get you. And this guy had performed this experimental procedure only once. And he said, let's try it on you. And so in the first session of, I think, 5 or 6 sessions, he gave me 150 shots in my hips and gluteal muscles, my
Mm.
butt. Each one felt like a wasp sting, and that
Mhm.
was deliberate. This was just dextrose, sugar water.
Mhm.
And the point was to flood the zone of my nerves. What was happening is the pain of snapping hip syndrome was causing my gluteal muscles to tighten. And when they tightened, that pulled. It was a vicious
Uh-huh.
cycle. It pulled the tendon even tighter. And this was a way to confuse the nerves so that they stopped firing and so that my gluteal muscles could relax and everything would get better. And it actually worked. The problem was it also required extremely painful PT, more than an hour. And I thought at the time, as I was going through this, having written about rhetoric and for so many years, I realized I had to do some serious reframing.
Mm.
Get back to habits just a second, but
Yeah,
the
of course.
reframing part of it had to do with my saying, okay, I was going to, by the way, I was ready to tell the doctor anything.
Yeah.
Apparently, I don't do well under torture
Yeah.
to get him to stop. But I said to myself, this is training. This is training for something I really want to do.
Mm.
And I'm actually good at pain. I am a champion sufferer, which is that what the ancients believed suffering was a skill. It wasn't something you feel sorry for. It's something you withstand and it proves what a noble person you are. So I said, okay, I'm suffering as part of my training. Now, along the way, I thought, there's no way I'm going to do this PT to develop these habits I want. And this is where we get back into Aristotle,
Mm.
his theory of habits. In order to get your audience, which may be yourself in this case,
Mhm.
to do something or stop doing something, you have to dangle a lure of some sort, something really wonderful and
Mhm.
tempting. That's the sales part essentially.
Yes.
So I thought I couldn't think of what that might be to get myself to do this PT and maybe do even more.
Mhm.
Until one day, I'm being the word nerd I am, I was looking up the word hyperbole in the Oxford English Dictionary, but wondering whether hyperbole was a trope. Because
Mm.
tropes are ways, metaphor is the most common trope, but there are tropes that we don't quite understand, which makes them
Mm.
more manipulative, like metonymy and synecdoche and irony. And I wondered if hyperbole was a trope because it does make you see things differently when
Yes.
somebody exaggerates something. So I looked it up. I knew what hyper meant. I knew this came from the Greek, means beyond, essentially above or beyond. What does bully mean? It turns out bully is where we get the word ball. It means to throw. So
Mm.
I thought, oh, to throw beyond. That's interesting because if I want some big goal, I love to think of myself as a dog chasing a ball that maybe somehow as a dog I managed to throw
Right.
ahead of me. So anyway, I thought what I'm going to do is become the first person over 50 ever to run his age up this particular mountain in New Hampshire where I live.
Mm.
Now, this mountain is used by Olympians around the world because it's this ideal height and slope for managing your VO2, your oxygenation
Mhm.
levels, and your ability to eliminate lactic acid from your body as you exercise. It's 3.7 miles, 2,800 feet elevation gain to a height of 4,800 feet.
Wow.
And it's very difficult because you have to jump up onto boulders. It's not some straight path the way you get in the West. Anyway, I thought, I'm going to do that. Now, I still wasn't walking, even after this procedure, without a serious limp. But I thought, I'm going to become the trail runner I used to be. And I used to be not a good trail runner, but an enthusiastic one.
Yes.
I had never really accomplished anything as an athlete, but I loved running through woods. It's still one of my favorite things to do. So I thought, okay, I'm going to train as much as possible for this. And I ended up training over time, 4 hours a day. Our income went down dramatically. I stopped drinking altogether. I ate only the most healthful things. I had no cheat days, no cheat meals for 9 months of the year when I was doing this. Now, but the way I started out was the second part of what Aristotle said is necessary for habits. First, you dangle the lure, but the second thing is you don't jump into your goal. You do it the most gradual way possible. So the lower the angle of your incline up to that goal, the better. So I started by thinking, okay, where am I going to find this time to do this? Because at the time I was having trouble just finding an hour. And I thought, what's the most useless hour of the day? It was the last hour when I was just streaming videos or whatever. And I thought, what if I shifted that onto the early morning? Well, I cheated because once a year, the United States government grants us an extra hour of the day by switching from daylight saving time to standard time. And I thought, I'm going to do that. And then, and by the way, when you do that, you're not suffering at all. You're just setting your clock differently, your alarm rather. So then I did it an extra hour in order to do that. Now I'm getting up 2 hours early. But what I did during those 2 hours was I decided this was just my time. I'm going to read books. I'm not going to let myself get distracted by the internet or anything. I'm just going to read books just for pleasure. After a while, I decided I really ought to. The whole point of this was to get ready to run up this mountain. So I really should do something more. So I switched over to physiology, running, and fitness books. And that actually got me excited for more. I started doing an online workout, a really gentle one. I started incorporating yoga. And then gradually I started going outside with a headlamp and running very slowly up. We owned a meadow at the time. We were on 150 acres, a very remote area. So I had lots of places to trail run. But I just ran up this meadow. It was glorious. I would see shooting stars and whatever. And it became just super fun to do. Then I incorporated weights and all that other stuff. But I built that up month after month to the point where finally I was doing trail runs twice a day and sprints and longer stuff, building up everything. And I had 2 physiologists who were advising me, both of whom, by the way, said they thought it was physically impossible to run my age. I was like, now by running my age, I mean running from the trailhead to the top of this mountain in fewer minutes than I was old in years. And so I had planned the run on my birthday, August 27th, when I turned 58. That gave me an extra minute because I was now a year older. And plus, I wanted to build as much pressure as possible. And here's why. My wife had said to me, why don't you try to apply the tools of persuasion to yourself? Now, that seems to be impossible because rhetoric works best when people don't know you're using it on them, right? And besides, who's my audience going to be if I'm me? And plus, what happens if your audience knows as much about the tools of manipulation as you do? I found a solution that we could get to that. But so this whole age run up Musalak was my way of testing all the tools of persuasion. It was stupid and pointless. A goal. Who cares? It's not going to make me famous in any way. Nobody even knows. Like the mountain is Musalak. The only people who know that are some athletes who know about it. And the other thing was that it was extremely painful and difficult and probably impossible. So I thought, what better way to convince myself that it was possible and build the habits that I need using these tools of persuasion on myself? And it was a terrible year. I made my wife miserable, but at the same time, it ended up toward the end making me happier than I had been in many years. I overcame some very serious depression which is very common in men in their late 50s. And at the same time, it let me know that these tools of persuasion could work on myself.
Mm. Yeah, I appreciate the story. And are you able to talk about it? Because I think the importance, what you and I have discussed previously, is self-persuasion is so powerful. And I think there's the other piece you said, it does differ between men and women. How did it apply to you in that instance where you were training and wanting to do this trail run? If you're able to expand a little bit more on what were some of these tools that you used?
So when you talk about gender differences, I
Mhm.
was actually suffering from something that's more common to women than to men, and that's imposter syndrome.
Mm,
I had never seen myself as a real athlete. I loved
mhm,
and played a lot. I was always bad at team sports. I have two brothers who were much more athletic than I was and got along with teams better. So, in order to employ these tools of persuasion, I had to convince myself that I was actually an athlete. And one of the most, first of all, I decided I was going to reframe everything.
mhm,
Um, that everything I did that was good for me, I called training.
mhm,
So, and just by using that word, I began thinking of myself as an athlete. The other thing I did was I employed a particular kind of rhythmic expression that was invented some thousands of years ago. What it was originally called the paean. Now
mm,
we know the paean, Paen, as a song of praise or a speech that praises somebody. But originally, Paean was a god of healing, and it was a god who healed all the other gods on Olympus.
mm,
Warriors, as they charged into battle back in the day, while they're carrying their spears and their shields, would chant a prayer to Pian, which was essentially, please don't let me die. So that became this rhythmic kind of war cry called a slogan.
mm,
And so the original slogan meant a war cry, something you yelled to intimidate your enemy, but it also did two things. It encouraged yourself, and this is great for self persuasion. And it also was magical. It caused the god of Pian to protect you. Well, so some years later, Marcus Tullius Cicero, one of the great rhetoricians and great Roman orator in the Roman Republic, said the paean actually comes down to the series of short and long principles. He, as an example, he talked about golden-haired far shooter, son of Zeus. And you can hear if you go attend a football game or a basketball game in the Ivy League. I
mhm,
live near Dartmouth. I used to work at Dartmouth. You will hear these nerdy students yell, repel them, make them relinquish the ball. It turns out that's a paean. It's almost a perfect paean.
mm,
And I think a lot of people naturally tend to chant this kind of thing. If you look at Madison Avenue back in the day of slogans to sell products, the snack food industry started with
mhm,
slogans. Lay's potato chips. Bet you can't eat just one.
mm,
Now, that combination of short and long syllables, it sticks in the brain better. And
mm,
now, but it makes it easier to repeat because it sticks so well, and it's the repetition that changes reality for
yeah,
people. And neuroscientists have confirmed this. There is a part of your brain, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex,
mhm,
that interprets reality. And so I thought, first of all, I'm going to come up with really dumb PNs
yeah,
that will make me laugh, because that's a good test to see whether I could actually get myself to believe them.
mhm,
So I started out with things like, my legs love rocks. I flow up rocks. Um, which they, meanwhile, desperately trying to clamber up from one boulder to another,
yeah,
slick rocks, a steep trail. And I did a series of those things. And I've ended up convincing myself that I actually could do these things.
mm,
I had another PN, which had to do with reframing what it's like to run up mountains, where I said I was stretching my legs,
mm,
essentially, instead of just painfully trying to get up a mountain. All that stuff repeated over and over again made it feel natural to me. And it also made me smile. It put me in a state that Aristotle called receptivity, which is this feeling of power and control and comfort.
Mm.
I call it the Homer Simpson state because it also makes you really stupid and easily manipulated. And that allowed these peons to just work their magic
Mm.
in my head. So there were a bunch of other things that I did. It turns out one of the most important things was this idea, this particular rhythm I would chant to myself. Now, people today call this stuff affirmations, and
Yeah.
there's something to that. There's a reason that works.
Yeah. And would you consider even mantras along the same lines? Because one of the things I've understood, it even in something simple as transcendental meditation, people will use mantras just to get into that state of consciousness. So it is interesting. I wonder if there's an overlap there.
I think there's a deep and very profound overlap
Hmm.
because, first of all, now I'm no expert on this, and you correct me if I'm going in the wrong direction, but mantras connect you with something higher than yourself. They help you get beyond your ego to get in touch with something higher. Now, when I was struggling to figure out how can I use these tools of persuasion, tools of rhetoric on myself, I had to figure out who my audience would be. Is it me? What do I mean by me? Who am I? Ego.
Yeah.
Or am I talking about something besides my ego? So I ended up doing a deep dive into the books of Aristotle I hadn't read from my previous books on rhetoric.
Hmm.
And I came across his weirdest book called On the Soul. And it's about the soul, but
Yeah.
it's not the soul that most people, most Americans at least, understand, which is something that survives your body. It lives beyond you
Hmm.
somehow. Aristotle wasn't quite sure what it was, so he's really interested in it. Being the biologist he was, he thought maybe it's an organ in the body, or maybe it's something that gets you in touch with something higher, something greater. He didn't say a god or the oversoul or anything like that,
Right.
but he was figure that out. Years later, of a philosopher in the 16th century said, I found it. It's in the pituitary gland. I have no idea what that means.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what Aristotle meant by the soul was this higher version, more
Hmm.
noble version, as he put it, of yourself.
Yes.
The way he described it is Boy Scout oath. I was a terrible Boy Scout. All I got out of it was I remember the oath, which is that a Boy Scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. Now, I don't think I qualify for all of those or
Yeah.
even half, but my soul does. And so my
Mhm.
soul is what I wish I could see in the mirror. And it's the one who corrects my daily self, which is constantly straying from that.
Yes.
So it turned into kind of a benevolent argument with my
Mhm.
soul that I'm better soul than maybe you think I am. I'm going to prove to you. But also, every time I screwed up and made a mistake, I would subconsciously or more often consciously talk to my soul and say,
Mhm.
this is a temporary error. The fact that I feel bad about this, that I feel shame because I'm feeling ashamed in front of you, dear soul, means that I hold the same values and I really want to live up to them. Plus, when I ate that donut,
Mhm.
I did that for 0.1% of my 24-hour day. So I have a 99.9% success rate, if you put it that way. And so I found myself having this, being able to detach myself. Now, the peons I used, the way they connect, I think, to the mantra is this idea that there is something higher. It can be a part of you, it can be separate from you. But I found as time went on, and in fact, on my 58th birthday, when I was at the top of Mount Musalak, I had it to myself. It was so beautiful. The conditions, by the way, on that day were terrible.
Mhm.
80% humidity, 60 degrees at the trailhead, Fahrenheit at um, 6 a.m. when I began. The problem, and that doesn't sound that hot, the problem is as you get older, your ability to dissipate heat diminishes and you burn enough calories to take a liter of ice and boil it.
Mhm.
So your ability to get rid of this heat. Now, of course, lactic acid tends to build up more and get dispersed less the hotter you get. So all this technical stuff was causing
Mhm.
chaos in my body.
Mm.
I get to the top, and I hadn't allowed myself to even to look at my watch, but I hit my watch still without looking at it. And I found myself thinking there was a more important thing going on. I felt the way people talk about when they take a mild hallucinogen. I felt at one with the universe. I felt incredibly grateful.
Mm.
4,000 people on a Facebook page I had set up to increase the pressure on myself had wished me luck. One really dear friend had said, "My hand will be on your back." And I
Mm.
think of that at the top, literally tears came into my eyes. I felt like it didn't matter whether I'd run my age or not. Now, all this self-persuasion, all this talking to my soul, I found myself thinking that my soul is connected with something
Mm.
higher in the universe beyond me. I felt like my ego wasn't really a part of it. And I think that's partly why I didn't look at my watch for quite some time
Mm.
while I grooved up on the top
Yeah.
of the mountain. Of course, then after a few minutes, I looked at my watch. I won't tell you whether I did it. You have to read the book. But the next thing I thought was, I have to remember to thank Dorothy, my
Mm.
wife, who suffered through all this.
Yes.
And also I thought, there's a bottle of wine waiting for me at home. I can't wait.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it's interesting because one of the things I've been reflecting on too, especially over the last week, is I think these challenges or goals, if you want to call it that, are really interesting. And I appreciate you mentioning, based on your understanding of reading Aristotle, that you want to spread it out. And because I think part of our makeup physiologically, and the way I understand dopamine too, is it's in the pursuit of something that dopamine's being released. And I think a lot of people experience that depression after we've achieved a specific goal, right? So I think in order to feel motivated, I like that you shared in terms of wanting to spread it out. But then the other thing I've come to understand is sometimes we get attached to the specific outcome and we lose sight of who we become in the process of pursuing the specific goal too. And even in your story, I'm sure looking back, everything you did to set yourself up to achieve this goal or work towards it, that set you up for, and I think that's the connection there in terms of even talking about your ability to continue to work out and push yourself even today.
That is such a great point. So the important thing here is I talk about a capital H hyperbole,
Yeah.
some big goal that seems impossible and that is so difficult or impossible that failure itself is a way of achieving a higher level. You can be proud of this version of failure. But more than that, it has to connect with your Aristotelian soul. So
Mhm.
this idea is that you really have to know and be familiar with your soul to the point where you feel obligated toward it. Now, how do you do that? One suggestion I say have in my book is plan a vacation. If
Mhm.
you have a bucket list, and first of all, why have a bucket list? I think it's nice to plan, but a lot of bucket lists are highly influenced by social media.
Mm.
Like, what's the best place to take a selfie for Instagram? And I mentioned in the book how if you go to the Louvre, and I understand that there's a new room now, so maybe it's not this bad anymore. But when I went to the Louvre to see them, I went to see the Mona Lisa,
Yeah.
and it was a bunch of people all holding up smartphones, jumping up and down, and the picture's kind of small,
Yeah.
and they're not getting some artistic experience at all. In fact, so I ended up in a different room discovering Charlemagne's sword, and I had the room to myself. And so I thought, what is this telling me? First of all, I'm clearly not the kind of guy who enjoys being in a crowd, which is
Yeah.
absolutely true.
Yep.
But also, I really am not interested in whether people know I've seen the Mona Lisa. Who cares? So now, at the same time, if you're the kind of person, if you find yourself going to unpopular places that really do wonderful things for you, that's your soul telling you exactly what that's about. So it's not
Mhm.
influenced by other people, it's influenced by your soul. I recently, just a week or so ago, before we talked
Mm.
last time,
Yeah.
had spent 9 days next to a swamp where I paddled my paddleboard across a protected lake where nobody comes,
Mhm.
and then hiked a heavy pack and a chair a mile to this site where I set up my backpacking hammock, and I read books for 9 days. I went through 7 novels, and there's no cell service there, by the way, no internet at all. I don't even bring my phone.
Yeah.
I have it to myself. And so what does that say? Now, other people think that that's a terrible idea. But for me, the idea of being in a swamp where wildlife actually comes to you, it's like they haven't evolved to understand a guy in a hammock, where you can just be quiet. Now, a lot of people would be bored to tears, and I don't blame them.
Yeah.
For me, the days rush by. Now, that clearly is what my soul is about. And so also, I love the idea of, as I'm sure you are too, that the idea of a challenge.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, writing a book is every bit as hard as
Mhm.
running up a mountain. I had done that. So I thought this idea of training alone, but still engaging with other people to support me in a way is comfortable. That's connected to my soul. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody should try to run up a mountain. Instead, I think a capital H hyperbole could be something like learning to play the guitar, but planning to go busking on some street somewhere. Or I actually had learned a little bit of Esperanto, which is this international language that's fairly easy to use. Believe it or not, there's something like 2 million Esperanto speakers around the world, from Japan to Sweden, everywhere.
Mm.
And so if you join one of the Esperanto clubs online, you're welcome anywhere in the world. I thought, what a great hyperbole. What if you could become fluent in Esperanto, a stupid, pointless goal to prove yourself that you can learn something wonderful like this, and then go become the house guest around the world in various places if you can afford to
Mm.
travel.
Mm.
Or suppose you, like me, you can't cook. Go not just learn how to cook, but prepare the most amazing meal anybody has ever had and
Mhm.
invite snobbish guests over.
Yeah.
All that I think is a way. Now, if that doesn't get you in touch with your Aristotelian soul, on the other hand, you're not going to sustain that ability. You're going to cook, you're going to be disappointed with yourself, or else so proud of yourself you think you can never do better, and
Yeah.
you give up. Thoreau, his father was a pencil maker, and Thoreau worked incredibly hard to make the perfect pencil.
Mm.
And once he did, he just stopped. He didn't make another pencil the
Right.
rest of his life. That clearly wasn't getting him in touch
Yeah.
with his Aristotelian soul.
For sure.
He had to build a cabin instead.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I think along the lines, and you touched on the whole wanting to get that perfect picture for Instagram, especially in the world we live in today. How much of that distraction in general is keeping us away from getting in touch with that soul piece? Because to your point, even in your story of going to the swamp and getting that quiet time and disconnecting from all the distractions, I think it's so powerful, right? And I try to find those moments when I'm in the mountains too, to be able to just shut out all that noise around me and just listen to what's coming up inside. And to me, that's connecting with the soul and really listening to the inner wisdom. And I often go out there to, if I'm trying to work out a problem in my life, I often come back with clarity and I'm able to approach it in that light.
There are a couple of things going on. One is the information flood,
Yeah.
which is this idea, if I'm wearing AirPods right now, only for this. But when I'm on a hike or a run, I don't I don't wear it because, like you, I think I find myself interesting while I do it. Sometimes I don't, in which case I pay attention to the wildlife or the trees or
Mhm.
whatever. But ideas will come, or sometimes I'll even have an idea for, I have a Substack post, and every
Mhm.
now and then you think, oh, I really need to
Mhm.
come up with an idea. And I'll have some vague idea, and I won't try to think about it. I'll
Mhm.
think the next time I'm on a run or a hike, or bike ride, I'll let myself just sort of percolate. I think of
Yeah.
it that way. And you're nodding your head because I know you do this too,
Yeah.
right? And
Yes.
so the ideas come to you. Now, the problem is there's so many opportunities for really cool stuff. I love listening to audiobooks, and I do them while I work out in the gym, in part because the music's terrible in every gym. So I'm just listening to audiobooks. But at the same time, there's social media.
Hmm.
And social media it makes us very tribal because we receive the information. The algorithms just basically give us what they think we want.
Hmm.
And so we tend to get this kind of groupthink going on. And the problem with being tribal is there's several problems with this. One is political, in that Aristotle defined the best kind of rhetoric that politics should be all about being based on the future tense, on what's best for the future and what's to the advantage of your audience. And so he called this deliberative rhetoric. So deliberative rhetoric has to do about choices in the future. Then there's forensic rhetoric, which has to do with crime and punishment, who done it. Then there's present tense rhetoric, which has to do with values, the good, what's good and what's bad, who's good and who's bad. Now, we should, as a culture, be able to make choices, even when we disagree, that affect the future as we want it. And we're now, on the other hand, social media is all about the present.
Mm.
Influencers, who's good, who's bad, who are the criminals, who are the good people, who are the insiders.
Yeah.
And that social media is built to do that. So the more we find ourselves being flooded with information that distracts us from ourselves, and the more we connect with our own tribe instead of our Aristotelian souls or something larger than ourselves, all we're doing is we're being selfish, but selfish in a way that's a groupthink kind of
Yes.
selfish. Like, I am my tribe. Now, when you're alone and you're thinking your own thoughts, that's connecting you to something much higher than
Hmm.
that. And the more you do that, I think the happier you're going to be. In
Hmm.
my book, by the way, I talk about how when I was in college, I was the editor of our newspaper. And so I got invited to have breakfast with this monk from Tibet,
Mm.
hosted by the chair of the religion department. I wasn't going to go because who cares? I was an American studies major. That has nothing to do with monks in Tibet. I
Mm.
was an idiot. My news editor said, and I asked my news editor if he'd go instead.
Yeah.
And he said, "Who is this guy?" And I handed him this thing and he said, "That's the Dalai Lama. You have to go." And I said, "Who's the Dalai Lama?" Not to my credit, but this was back in, I think, 1975.
Yeah.
When the Dalai Lama had been extracted from Tibet by the CIA and was on his first American tour. So he wasn't quite as famous as he is
Hmm.
today. Nonetheless, I
Yeah.
mean, shame on me. So I go 8 o'clock in the morning. There's an interpreter, the professor, and me,
Hmm.
and the Dalai Lama. And he was wearing these robes and these nerdy looking aviator glasses that were unfashionable even then. And he giggled the entire time. And maybe he's laughing at me, go like this idiot student. But he seemed so ridiculously happy that I was really unimpressed.
Mm.
So I went back and banged out 2 paragraphs. Monk visits the campus.
Yeah.
Years later, I'm working in Washington, D.C. And one of my colleagues said, "Hey, the Dalai Lama is coming to Washington. You going to go?" And I said, "The Dalai Lama? Hey, I had breakfast with him once." Dead silence in the office. And I realized, like, I got nothing to say. I don't know what to say about this guy. When I was years later, when I was training for this run up Musalak and trying to figure out how to get in touch with my Aristotelian soul and persuade it that I was capable of doing this, I thought back on that because I started doing more and more research on the Epicureans who
Hmm.
believe in a philosophy of happiness. And it's more and more research seems to be digging up evidence that these ancient Greeks were going to India all the time, hopping these trading vessels. And so there's a deep connection between Buddhism and Epicureanism. And
Mm,
so why was I looking at that? I was trying to figure out not just how to achieve this athletic goal, but how to be happy, how to
mm,
overcome depression in ways that went beyond the drugs I had been on and gotten off. And I realized over time, and friends who are Buddhists have said to me, you often find some monks really do laugh a lot.
yeah.
And I thought that's what the Dalai Lama was in touch with, something way beyond this idiot student at breakfast. He wasn't giggling, he was expressing happiness. And I realized that to this day, I smile a lot more than
Yeah.
and in part because I got in touch with something,
Mm,
however you want to define it.
yes, absolutely. And along those lines, because people are always talking about pursuing happiness, and I've talked about this as well. Is happiness something we need to pursue, or is it something that we can be in touch with? And I feel it's the latter. And to tie it back to something you shared at the beginning around suffering, right? Because even suffering can be a choice in my mind, in terms of you can find meaning in the suffering, right? And then it doesn't feel like it as much. But I feel like there is a connection there between that and happiness. And I just want to get your thoughts.
The Epicureans believed that you can and should pursue happiness. Now, I'm not sure that's necessarily a contradiction
Yeah.
of simply experiencing it. You have to prepare for it. You have to put into some state for doing it. In my case, it was a hot pursuit.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
putting myself through painful routines 4 hours a day to be happy.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's good for everybody or necessarily what you need to do. But the fact is, the Epicureans, and to some degree, as I understand it, Buddhists as well, think of happiness as a result, at least, of discipline, of a
Mhm.
kind of disciplined
Yes.
life. And by the way, Epicureans have a bad reputation that were spread by the early Christians who were more Stoics. And so they spread these rumors that the Epicureans were having orgies and these huge feasts. It's where we get Epicureanism today, this idea that tasty meals. The Epicureans ate essentially oatmeal and cheese and watered down wine. And I actually did some research and found that if you had an purely Epicurean diet and you went to Target to for your food, you could be an Epicurean for $7 a day.
Mm.
You'd probably die young because I don't think
Yeah.
nutritionists would say cheese and wine is necessarily the right thing to do. But that being said, they were actually the point of being an Epicurean was to live this disciplined life that would make you avoid regret later.
Mhm.
And that's where happiness would lie, was of a painful life.
Yes.
There's something to it. And but unlike the Stoics who believe that the life of virtue was the way to do it, like to live the good life was the whole purpose of life. Happiness can result from that. It's a good thing. But that wasn't the point. The point was virtue. And said, screw that. Like the whole point is happiness. Now they both ended up living remarkably similar lives. The Epicureans were more withdrawn from society than the Stoics, but nonetheless, they still were highly disciplined. But
Yes.
their point was happiness. And I think
Mhm.
that's more American. That
Yeah.
we want to be happy. How are we going to do it?
Yeah. Yeah, and coming back to the whole notion of, as you were touching on with social media and tribal thinking, and even the concept of it, echo chamber, and tying it to something you shared at the beginning around rhetoric and being able to hold conversations and be comfortable with disagreement. One of the things I've observed, especially in general, like people get very uncomfortable when someone disagrees with them, and we don't necessarily encourage the ability, or in general, that's been my observation, that we're not comfortable in having discourse, especially if someone is disagreeing with us. And my perspective on that is, even if someone is disagreeing with me, there's something I can learn from the perspective they're offering, or I can challenge myself, as we've talked about earlier, to better equip myself to be able to then speak to them from their side of the street. But there's so much discomfort around that, and we tend to label each other certain names just because the other person is not agreeing with us.
That's absolutely true. And so, what I suggest to people, and I've written about this in my books, the first thing you do if you find yourself in an uncomfortable situation or you're confronted by somebody who's angry or expressing an opinion that makes you uncomfortable, or if they say they're uncomfortable with your opinion, the first thing you want to do is to set your goal. What do I want to get out of this? What do I really want to get out of it? And 9 times out of 10, what you really probably want is a relationship.
Mm.
You may not even want necessarily to change the other's politics. You may want that, but your first goal really has to be the relationship, because without the relationship, you're not going to convince anybody. Even Aristotle, Mr. Logic himself, said logic and facts don't persuade very much. It's whether your audience likes and trusts you, which he called ethos. It's the character people think you have. And so that's the first thing, is set your goal. But maybe what you want to do is to be the grown up in the room. The other thing I say is find out who's persuadable, because a lot of people aren't, not in one session anyway.
Right.
You're not going to turn someone around in one
Okay.
quick argument, certainly not online. But ask yourself, who else is listening in? And so I love to talk about Thanksgiving, where there's always the uncle with opinions. And by the way, I love playing that role. So what happens, and so I do this time of year, I do several hours a week I spend with AP English language students because they adopt one of my books, Thank You for Arguing. And I always get, how do I deal with the crazy? And I talk about Thanksgiving. The thing to do when you're in this situation is to think, okay, who else is listening in, and how can I improve my ethos? How can I improve my reputation?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm the one who should. One way to engage, by the way, is not to disengage and say, hey, let's just have pumpkin pie and forget about it. One way to do is to ask questions. I call it aggressive listening, because by asking questions, often what happens is you ask questions in specific ways. Ask about, all right, where'd you get your facts?
Mm.
The second thing you ask, is this a trend, or is this something that happened once in Oklahoma? And you based your whole theory on this. And the other is, can you send me to where you got this information? Now, 9 times out of 10, people don't know what they're talking about. And when they mention a fact, they cannot bring you to a reliable source at all. And what happens, and a lot of research shows this, people will back off somewhat from their opinion. I don't mean this is happening everywhere, or I don't think every immigrant is a criminal.
Right.
And so gradually people will start modifying their opinion. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to change it all to flip flop or whatever, but by asking questions, you're not going to be the aggressor in them. You're going to be seen as the grown up. You may actually learn something. They may actually steer you to things, as my friends have done. But more important than that, you can confuse them, which can be so satisfying when it's the uncle at Thanksgiving.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. And how does this tie into the whole persuasion piece that you talked about right at the beginning? And I am curious, because you said you played the role of a manager, which something that you didn't enjoy, but how could you have used some of that persuasion at the time, or were you using it at the time? And so, yeah, so we've talked about self-persuasion, but then how do we persuade others? I know you touched on it just now briefly too, in terms of asking questions. Sometimes that's an indirect way, but in general, and not so much so to be manipulative in the sense of trying to get something out of it, but just coming to an agreement or getting to a specific place.
So I define persuasion as manipulation. I think there's one and the same, because what you're doing is you're using certain tools to get people to change their mood or their mind their choices over something or their belief in something, or hardest of all, their willingness to do something or to stop doing something. Now, rhetoric is a dark art. It's been used for evil, the same tools that have been used to bring people together and change the world for the better.
Yeah.
So the point is, I think you need to really understand your ethical beliefs before you
Mm.
go in and try to manipulate anybody, whether it's a group of underlings in an office situation or whether you're trying to change the politics of the nation. There was this ancient rhetorician named Quintilian. He was an African in the Roman and a Roman citizen in ancient times, who said that the orator, meaning the person practicing rhetoric, was a good man speaking. I think he was being hopeful. And even at the time, he knew that doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
And you can see today really first-rate rhetoric going on to do some things that I think are truly evil in the world. So all that being said, I ended up back in the day, I made my numbers, as we say. I was working for a corporation running 6 magazines with a combined circulation of 6 million and setting up websites early in the days of the dot-com era and figuring out how to make money from it all. I did it. I succeeded. But at every meeting, the CEO made fun of me. No one else, just me. I dressed wrong. I said the wrong things. I expressed my doubts too openly. I didn't fit in. And so I learned the importance of decorum, which I think I was revealing my discomfort as an off the charts introvert.
Yeah.
And so decorum is often interpreted as like good manners. And when it actually comes from the Latin fitness, as in fitting in with your environment, I find myself, and I work as a consultant now, bringing these tools to corporations, nonprofit groups, government agencies, used to be government agencies.
Yeah.
And decorum is a really important part of what I actually teach now. But my clients are younger than my children now. So how am I, a privileged white man and an old guy, how do I fit in now? I didn't fit in back in the day when I was 40 years old. How do I fit in now when I'm even less like the people I speak with? And by the way, that my clients are much more diverse than who were early in my career, and a lot more women as well in management roles. One of the things I tell clients, and particularly clients who are trying to win venture capital in a competitive base, I teach them all the tools of rhetoric that I can that would seem appropriate. But the last thing I teach is, when you walk into the room, send love beams out of your eyes. And this is one of the most important aspects of leadership, believe it or not. Now, most people think I've just been chewing some interesting gummy when I say this, and they ignore me. The few who obey understand what Marcus Tullius Cicero said, which is that the eyes are the windows to the soul. You're a loving soul and you're practicing decorum. And in any uncomfortable situation, this can really work as long as you can try to do it sincerely. Before I speak with any group, online or otherwise, I tell myself, I'm going to love these people. And those clients who actually go into these competitive situations where you have these frowning people at a table and you're trying to get money out of them will come back saying, I got the love beams right back. It was a love fest, and it truly works. And I find that the people I disagree with most, especially politically, when I tell myself I love them, good things happen and people tend to trust me better. It's the single best tool I know, other than setting my goal in any situation.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And so what do you think that would be enough? Like, especially right now in your country, and there's parts of it even showing up in my country, there's so much polarization and there's not enough discourse happening, at least from my view, for what it's worth. But what needs to happen to close that gap?
This is where I really don't know. I think the big thing to do is, first of all, to practice on yourself. Is saying you can solve climate change by getting an electric car. It is a very tiny solution. But the first thing to do to practice on yourself is, first of all, extremely limit your social media presence, and much more how much you absorb from social
Yes.
media. It's not good for you.
Mm.
And I don't have to tell you this. Most people are now fully aware that this is a vice, that,
Yes.
it's not good for you. If you want to smoke a cigarette, go right ahead, but it's not good for you. Same
Mhm.
thing with social media. Now, social media is a marvelous way of keeping in touch with friends. And so checking on friends every now and then is a good thing, but you're also going to get a lot of garbage,
Mhm.
obviously. Don't express a political opinion online unless it's something thoughtful and backed up, and not on the usual social media platform. I actually think Substack is terrific, and
Mhm.
that's why I do a newsletter on it. And
Yeah.
I find that the comments I get are very thoughtful. And now there's a lot of terrible stuff on Substack, and I
Yeah.
generally ignore the political opinion stuff, but there's
Uh-huh.
also really good reporting, but everything is footnoted and backed up, and people challenge the stuff that doesn't seem real enough.
Mhm.
So it's not tribal so
Yeah.
much. Oh, I mean, it is. People do
Yep.
read the stuff they agree with, but it's much better that way. So absorbing more thoughtful stuff. The other thing is correct your attention span.
Yep.
And TikTok, which, by the way, I've had to do. The marketing people at Penguin Random House, who was my publisher, have said to me, "You got to. It's how
Yep.
you sell a book." It's like, how is something less than 60 seconds long going to get people to read an entire book? I don't get it. But so I actually have that one TikTok video I did actually went viral,
Mhm.
and it's me explaining classical rhetoric while doing pull-ups. And I really hope that sells books, because it's embarrassing.
Yeah.
And now I revealed this, so people are going to see it. And why I even brought it up, I don't know. That being said, after you get past yourself,
Mm.
you're thinking about how to connect to others. Start thinking about ways to do that
Mm.
that don't have to do with social media. And there are so many ways to, as silly as it sounds, clubs can change the world. I once edited a story in one of the magazines I worked on years ago. It was Outside magazine. And I sent a writer to the Czech Republic to do a story on the Tromska movement. Back in the 1920s, this German writer named Karl May wrote all these Western novels about cowboys and Indians and tramps, hobos. He never visited America, but he wrote these highly imaginative books.
Yeah.
I don't know if they've even been translated into English, but they were huge in Europe back in the 20s through the 20s and 30s. So young people in the Czech Republic and other places, but particularly Czechs, would spend their weekends riding the rails, in other words, buying a ticket, and then hanging out in the woods, dressed up like hobos or cowboys and Indians. Silly as it sounds, it was huge. Like, it was a big thing to do. And that lasted, by the way, it still goes on. So now, when they were in the woods, when the Nazis took over most of
Yeah.
Europe, these tramps became the resistance movement.
Mm.
And this was true in Yugoslavia as well. So it seems so innocent. These kids were just going to the woods and playing. They were actually organizing in order to do things like blow up train tracks and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Years later, during the Cold War, the Czech tramps, as they called themselves, continued. It formed another resistance movement. And Václav Havel, who became the first leader after the Velvet Revolution, said it was the tramps, the Tromska, who were most responsible for forming the resistance to the Soviet Union and helping free the Czech Republic. Now, why
Mhm.
am I bringing this up? I think that one of the biggest problems we have is that we think that giving a great speech or having a video or even going on a march is going to change the world. It doesn't.
Mhm.
Doesn't. If you look at the Million Woman March back when women were wearing the pink hats and everything. If you even look at Black Lives Matter, neither one of those movements went anywhere.
Hmm.
Why? Because no organization resulted from it. The other hand, if you look at the civil rights movement, students in high school studied Martin Luther King and his speeches. They're wonderful, great literature, but that didn't change civil rights in America. It was the movement, the organization.
Hmm.
And you often will say a lot of the gay rights movement arose from these groups of men who were getting together for fun.
Hmm.
As strange as it is, I think that if we go out and bowl
Yeah.
or book clubs, make sure that you've got block parties going
Hmm.
on in the summer, whatever it is. Being social and forming organizations around just plain fun is going to get you in touch with people who may not share your political
Hmm.
opinion, and it can end up doing great things. The Russian Revolution started out with cells. A lot of them had formed around social groups.
Hmm.
Now, the American Revolution started in pubs. This is social media does not change the world. And I know that people think that the success on the right came from social media. And in fact, yes, there are a lot of loners who go crazy because of social media and do horrible things that will change the people's opinions, but they don't form organizations. And rhetoric has to do with social movement, with
Yeah.
getting together, not just giving speeches, but bringing people to do things in common.
Yeah. Yeah, and you touched on something really crucial in even in your experience because you talked about attention span and the short form, immediate hook that social media is based on does limit people's attention span. And then you talked about something like Substack. I intentionally, and I'll get to the point here, but I intentionally made the decision to step away a little bit from social media where I was spending a lot of time and I started focusing on longer form content, mainly for that reason, because I felt like my ideas or the things I was thinking about couldn't be expressed in 3 seconds. Or I didn't have that skill to be able to get people's attention in 3 seconds because I was putting a lot of thought and emphasis and reflecting on different things, which requires me to build on long form content. So something like Substack or just a newsletter in general, where I'm really getting into the depths of things and bringing it all together, which has been really helpful for me. But I made that realization, and then looking back, I'm like, yeah, it's just I don't have personally for me too, I need to like that attention span piece is crucial. Like I can see how it can be a problem because I've been a victim to it as well.
The other thing that happens, tell me if this is true, you engage with a different set of people when
Absolutely.
you are being more thoughtful.
Yes.
And those are the people you can learn from. And those are the people who will change the world.
Yeah. It's the
If
feedback too, right? Because you're not with the shorter form content, I don't think you're getting feedback because there's really nothing there, right? There's no depth or substance to it. Whereas if you've got longer form content, like you said, if things are footnoted and you're making references, then people can evaluate what you're putting out there as well and offer feedback or even share that, hey, maybe you need to look at this piece of material or these articles, whatever the case may be. And that's where I think, again, you grow together.
Also, it's a chance. The best storytelling is more than a 40-word Twitter or X. And good stories take a little bit more time.
Hmm.
And that's where you actually get a real connection with people is with storytelling. I love hearing people's stories. One of my frustrations in life is that people are so bad at it. And I think that in general, people have gotten worse at telling stories. We get the and then kind of story. I did this and then that, and then this happened, and then that happened without any sense of, okay, come on, let's have an arc. Let's have an interesting character. Let's have some
Yeah.
tension to this where, heroic journey or however you
Yes.
want to do it. Let's read Save the Cat and learn about the beat system. So I actually, a lot of what I do just for my preachy part of rhetoric is to encourage people to become better. And it sells stuff a lot better too. It's a great way. And Cicero himself talked about this. He said, any great speech needs the narratio, the narration, the story part. That's where your facts come in, but your facts are laid out in a
Yes.
way that's really compelling.
hmm Yeah, and I know we meant to talk about storytelling, and I agree with you. I think there's a reason why, and I mentioned this before on this podcast too, is there's a reason why some stories have stood the test of time, because what I've learned as I've read some of these stories too is I can see a part of myself in the character, the struggle, the as you were sharing in your story as well of climbing this mountain, I could see parts of myself in that, as you were sharing your struggle, the goal setting, the achievement that you experienced, the gratitude you had, because I've done something similar, right? Not the exact same thing, but there's so much that I can connect to, which gets people attached and hooked to the story, which is the whole point.
Yeah, I want to hear your story.
What would you like to hear?
What was it that you accomplished?
I think there's many different things. So I'll start. We've talked about, and one of the things that you and I relate to, because you mentioned your father was an engineer. The biggest thing was I looking back, as much as I'm not practicing engineering anymore, I've shared that it allowed me to learn a lot about myself. So for me, it was being of South Asian descent, and there's obviously stereotypes around that, but I was told early on that, hey, you've got a few options, but they're all centered around education, and you have to do it because your family immigrated to this country and they've sacrificed all these things. And being the eldest, I got all this pressure put on me. So at a very young age, I felt this pressure that I had to pursue an education. And I remember being in engineering my first year, and I 19. So first time freedom for a lot of people around me, my peers. And it was like, okay, we're all going to go out to the bars and we're going to party. And my friends would obviously find me and I'd be in the library. And for me, I knew at that point, even looking back, I remember like I had said, no, this is 4 or 5 years that I am going to stick with this, because I know at the end I'm going to come out as an engineer, I'll find a job, and then I can enjoy my life. So I had set that goal, and it was obviously 5 years. So how do you stick with it? And I was able to get through that process and made a lot of sacrifices, right? I didn't have a social life. I was working part time. So my weekends were spent catching up on schoolwork, and engineering was very challenging. I remember it's like you get into the semester, and probably 3 weeks in, then you're just doing midterms, assignments, all the way until the end of the semester when you're writing the final exam. So it was a grind, right? As soon as you start the semester, there's really no downtime. So looking back, that has served me well, because I've shown to myself, I've proven to myself that if I set my mind to something and I have a goal, I know what it takes. I know that I'm capable, and I know I need to be disciplined to achieve it. So there's all these things. So coming back to present time to become a therapist or psychologist, same thing, right? Working full time, having all the pressures of life and yeah, all the responsibilities you have, and then doing school. I was able to do it because I set my mind to it. Same thing with doing this podcast, right? You look at the stats where people will, there's something around only 5% or 8%, something like that, have more than 20 episodes. So what's going on there? People are giving up, right? And I've been fortunate enough to have guests like yourself and do more than 300 episodes. So again, it's just something that I've been able to find within myself that I know anything I'm working on, if I truly believe in it, it requires consistency and the discipline required to do well.
That's a great story. And Aristotle would say the connection that you made between engineering and podcasting and the story, the narrative that connected the two,
Mm-hmm.
is what he called analogous thinking. And it's a really important thing in terms of determining what your soul is and where your sense of self-discipline can
Mm-hmm.
come from. So you're a really disciplined guy. You taught yourself that discipline in a way. You were under pressure, family pressure. So it was external. It
Yes.
became internal.
Yes.
And so you applied the one thing to another. Now, on a much more quotidian, I talk about dishwasher loading as a way to illustrate
Yes.
analogous thinking, which is that when I first became a manager, I thought, I'm not good at telling people what to do, which, by the way, is not good management anyway.
Yeah.
But what did I know? But I realized I am absolutely brilliant at loading dishwashers. There's always one in a family who's the
Yeah.
good dishwasher loader. And it could be the source of some family strife. I swear my wife stands back and throws dishes into the dishwasher. I'm really good at it. And I remember thinking about, can I really do this? Can I really manage at a fairly high level with lots of people? And I thought, I'm really good at dishwasher loading. What does that mean? It means that I'm really good at organization and systems. Because when you think, like, we load a dishwasher, the you don't just put plates in where you're supposed to put plates. Like, you have to think about where the
Yeah.
water is going. And I am the son of an engineer. This must have something to do with it. But,
Yeah.
and also being able to stack it so that you run the dishwasher as few times as possible. That's a glorious,
Yeah.
noble goal. And so I thought, how do I apply that to management? I thought a group of people or a system, every single employee is like a plate or a cup. They're very different. They have to be faced in different directions. They have to interact differently. And plus, the people in their current position may not be appropriate there. I may have to move that cup.
Yes.
Dumb as this was, first of all, it made me smile. So it made me more comfortable and put me into cognitive ease, as they say. But at the same time, it was thinking analogously in the same way that you went from engineering to podcasting and thought that somehow the two of them could be relevant because of your sense of discipline. The way you did it, your story at Amarl, at least what I heard,
Yes.
which is that this idea that you stuck to it. You were disciplined, you avoided the distractions, and you kept
Mm-hmm.
going.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I've shared this before. I remember I just had my mom's face in my head, like just her being disappointed or the expectations and the hope she had. And now I can appreciate there's been some unhealthy aspects to it, which I've had to go for therapy and figure out and work through. But that was my motivation at times when I could catch myself being tempted to be like, oh, it's just one night. And then just reminding myself, no, like my mom has these hopes for me to succeed. And that's how I internalized it, to the point that then it wasn't about my mom. When you and I chatted last week, we talked about for me working out. It was the same thing as, okay, I would envision who I wanted to become. Right. So when I first started working out, yeah, of course, the weights are light. You feel stupid. You don't know what you're doing. And you see all these jacked people around you. And you're like, I don't feel like I belong here. But it was just that repetitiveness that if I keep doing this consistently, I can become this person. And then when I achieved the goals I had, even with just working out, then it was like, okay, now I've convinced myself, but I also have experienced what it feels like to exercise. And that alone is motivation. And the other benefits you feel. So I just started a year and a half ago, I started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and being able to work out and stay fit has helped me in that aspect. Now, there's different skills and techniques. Obviously, you have to pick up, but I started off in a good place just to be in a good shape and be strong.
I would add that I sense from you a really strong self-identity around this discipline.
Mm.
So of course you're a guy who works out. That is your ultimate connection to your soul,
Mm.
because you will apply discipline, avoid distractions, and improve. Every successful workout person who's not using drugs is has that kind of character or personality. And often what happens is people misidentify their own identity. And
Mm.
this is where the Aristotelian soul can really help, I believe. People, so the other than dishwasher loading, probably my greatest skill is napping, which every old guy really should do.
Yeah.
And so I'm super good at it. I've been a champion sleeper ever since I college. When after my first year, I
Hmm.
had a girlfriend who was really rich, and she lived on Mount Tamalpais in San Francisco. And I took a Greyhound bus from Philadelphia, where my family lived, to San Francisco. A 3-day journey, um, where no stops along the way,
Murder.
except for like bathroom
Yeah.
stops or whatever. And so I had to learn to sleep on a bus with my head bouncing against the
Yeah.
window. And I had no choice. I just simply did it. And ever since then, I was able to nap. I brag about it all the time, about how good napping I am. Whenever I do that, people look resentfully at me and say, I don't nap. I
Yeah.
can't nap. Now, a lot of people can't nap because of circumstances.
Yes.
That's totally legit. A
Yeah.
lot of people say, I just can't do it. And what they're saying to me is, I am not, my soul doesn't nap. I am not the kind of person, my identity doesn't have anything to do with napping. You can change that,
Mm.
because probably you really do. Your probably soul probably wants to be able to close its eyes 20 minutes
Yeah.
a day or
Oh
so.
yeah.
And that's a discipline, to be able to avoid the distraction, or understand if you're listening to the same audiobook over and over again. That's my technique. I listen to PG Woodhouse stories, and I have them memorized literally. That is so often.
Yeah.
I fall asleep like that to these
Hmm.
things. Now, that is a way in anything that where you want to accomplish a goal, where you're afraid of something, or you feel that you're not worthy of it. We're back into this imposter syndrome
Yes.
idea. If you can attach that to something else using analogous thinking, I'm good at this. Maybe that actually means I'm good at this. So with something like napping, maybe you're really good at scheduling. Napping is scheduling.
Yeah.
You really have to set aside. It's
Yes.
usually your lowest priority. Your ability to slot that time, that's a skill. Never mind your ability to close your eyes. Whether you fall asleep or not, you're still napping. That's a way of framing what a nap is. Anyway, all this has to do with forming your identity around things that get in touch with what you most want to do. Aristotle called it your needs versus your wants. He called them appetites versus your wants.
Mm.
So your needs are what your soul really wants.
Yes.
Your daily behavior is all the temptations and distractions. And if you find out what you really want to do, what's truly satisfied you, then you can apply that to other things in your life you're
Yes.
afraid of doing or feel you can't do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even in today's terms, the wants are the desires and the temptations that can be distractions, whereas the needs are what you actually need to do for your soul, what gives you a sense of purpose and fulfillment. And I think this might be a stretch, but I think there's truth to it based on the clinical work I do too. I see this in so many people where they're constantly being pulled into the wants and not focusing on the needs, which is leading to a lot of the anxiety and depression we see, which to my point here is it's self-induced. And when you're able to differentiate between the two and focus on what it is that you need on a day-to-day basis, you just start feeling a lot better about yourself as a person.
What do you listen for when someone comes into you with depression?
I listen to there's a few things I tend to focus on. First, there'll be what's their daily routine, right? So what are they doing? When are they waking up? And how much sleep are they getting? When are they going to bed? So what are some of their practices around that? the things they're saying about themselves. So what's the self-talk? And then do they have any specific goals they're working towards? Again, it's like people will say, if I'm depressed, how do I even get myself into doing goals? And it's the same thing we've talked about throughout this episode is there's something, I know you touched on it too, but I really like how Mike Tyson says it is discipline is doing what you hate, but doing it like you love it.
I hadn't heard that. I love
Yeah.
it.
So it's like getting to that mindset, right? And absolutely a level of discipline is required around when it comes to depression. I know I've experienced it, especially during the pandemic, but that was because I really wasn't aligning with my purpose in life. And as soon as I started making different choices, and I think alcohol definitely plays a factor too with depression. So it doesn't help, obviously, but yeah, that's what I listen for.
That's really interesting because those three categories, those questions you asked, are highly rhetorical.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
you're talking about habits, the language and the voice in your head,
Mhm.
and the goals you've set for yourself and whether or not you can make any attempt at
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Obviously, the two aren't completely aligned with each other, but there's so much having to do with the power of words in your
Yes.
head.
Yeah, and that kind of to bring it to a close leads us to something you and I chatted about last week too was discerning between shame and guilt, and you have a different perspective on it. In the therapeutic work I do, it's how people connect with shame, right? And I often ask them, what's the internal narrative you have in going on in your head? Am I good enough? Am I worthy? Am I a failure? And then it's asking, when did you internalize this message? And that's often when people are stuck in shame because they're beating themselves up. And that's where the self-talk is so important. And then discerning between the guilt and shame, where guilt will tell us I did something wrong or I made a mistake or I failed, whereas shame will put us into the identification with it. I'm a failure. And here's just more evidence of why I can't do the things I'm supposed to be doing.
I think I thought about our conversation since then, and I think we just got confused over terms, or maybe I did. I see shame as something that's temporary and
Mhm.
ashamed. Now, who are you feeling ashamed of
Yes.
in front of? And in my case, once I figured out what my Aristotelian soul was about, I could be embarrassed in front of my soul.
Yeah.
I'm eating this donut. Geez, I'm being watched while I do
Yes.
that. That's shame. Whereas I saw guilt as being a scar that
Mm.
is restricted. And that's my identity. In any case, I think what we're really talking about is whether we're feeling a wrongness, like a self wrongness that's attached to our identity, as opposed to a temporary embarrassing lapse.
Yes.
And so I made the distinction, and I've written about this, and I think you and I talked about it when I first met my wife to be. We were working for the same organization, and she was an attractive young woman, and I was being my most debonair self. And in the middle of my saying something profound, she said, "Hey, by the way, your fly is down." And according to her, I literally covered myself and collapsed to the floor. I literally
Yeah.
went down to the floor. And back then, we wore suits to work. Like this is anyway. And she said later that she was more attracted to my open embarrassment than she
Yes.
was to anything I said. And I think what's interesting about that is I didn't feel afterward that I am such an awkward person. I will never be able to talk to
Yeah.
a woman again. And I think the fact that I was detached, this was
Yes.
something temporary, but deeply embarrassing.
Yes.
I was kicking myself for days after,
Mhm.
but I didn't feel like I'm the kind of guy who goes around showing my underwear.
Yeah.
I didn't attach it to my, and I think that really just like to sum this up, if we could possibly do that. I think a lot of what you and I have been talking about is this sense of who we are and the voice that we carry within us that
Mhm.
tells us who we are.
Yes.
And rhetoric is one possible way to study the art of persuasion in order to persuade ourselves that we're not as bad as we are and that we have a soul within us that truly is better. We just have to live up to it.
Yes. Yes. And I agree with you. And I want to tie a few things you've shared today together around, yes, living up to that better soul that we're meant to. And I think when we're permanently stuck in that sense of embarrassment, as you're sharing, then we're the ones that are beating ourselves up and limiting ourselves. And whether or not you connect to the soul or God, I think it's being able to feel that aspect that I'm here and I have a choice and I can feel that love, as you were sharing, when one of the persuasion methods is to express that love outward. So how can you express it to yourself and feel it? And I think that's where you can really find that true meaning in life and really be able to do the things that you put your mind to. That's what's served me, is coming to that realization.
I love the way you said it. Wish I had said it.
You can take it now.
I
Use it.
will.
Yeah. But Jay, thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you for being so gracious with your time and sharing so much about yourself and the ways we can continue to improve and build habits that can serve us. Now, for listeners that want to learn more